Hello everyone, welcome to the course on television news production. My name is Millie Agarwal and I'm a media educator and practitioner with over 6 years of experience in both theory and practice. After completing my education from the prestigious media institutions of the country like the Indian Institute of Mass Communication and AJK-MCRC Jamia Millia Islamia, I got inclined towards media production and made numerous videos, films and anchorlings for various platforms. Being a teacher in Delhi University of subjects like radio production, documentary filmmaking and anchoring, I realized that both creativity as well as technical expertise are required for a good production, especially in today's time since it's the era of multimedia journalism. And these are the experiences I will bring to the course here. Let's start with the first module on Introduction to Television. In the first unit, we will look at the history and development of TV around the world. So before we start with television, we know that radio, newspapers and films were already in existence. They were a precursor to television. So let's look at what was happening to these mass media forms before the advent of television. So by 16th century, the modern newspaper had made inroads in a big way. Acta Diurnas was sort of a precursor to the modern newspaper. They were very big in Roman Empire. These were daily announcements which were engraved on stone tablets or wooden surfaces. In India, the first newspaper was the Bengal Gazette, which was published by James Augustus Hickey in 1780. After newspapers, the advent of technology made it possible for wireless telegraphy to be developed by Samuel Morse. And wireless telegraphy, in a sense, was the precursor to the modern radio. Modern radio was invented in 1895 by Marconi. And the idea of radio at that time was very different from what we know of radio today. The idea of radio was point-to-point communication. The save our soul messages which used to be sent, if you recall, when the ships were in the sea, for instance, when Titanic was sinking, it sent us an SOS message back for help. The purpose of radio evolved from point-to-point communication to that of military communication during the First World War, which started in 1914. After the First World War ended and the Second World War began in 1939, the purpose of radio shifted to that of a propaganda tool. In fact, in Nazi Germany, Hitler utilized radio, film, posters, pamphlets, television in a big way for propaganda. So from point-to-point communication, we moved to military communication, to propaganda, and after that the purpose changed to more social welfare schemes and entertainment that we know of radio today. So from newspapers to telegraph to radio, now we come towards the end of the 19th century when a lot of experiments are being made with moving images. People like Thomas Alva Edison and the Lumiere brothers are experimenting with devices such as the cinematograph and the kinetoscope. So by 1895, the first motion picture is being broadcast, is being projected also. And these are very different from the pictures that we know of today. The films of that time were actually called actualities. They projected things from real life scenes. They were very different from what we know of films today. But by the end of the 19th century, films had also come in a big way. 19th century is also an important century because a lot of important developments, technological advancement, industrialization, migration from rural to urban centers, and the information need because of this rose. This gave a further impetus to the growth and development of mass media. And with this backdrop, the development of television started in Europe and United States in the 1920s. So experiments were being conducted, and earlier a mechanical scanning disc was being used which did not scan the picture rapidly enough. Now you need to understand that motion pictures has been invented. Now we are moving towards the television. So the invention of iconoscope, which is the electric television tube in 1923, is what really speeded up things. What followed next were the kinescope or the picture tube. the electronic camera and the TV home receivers. These made television a reality. 1920s and 30s saw the further development and growth of the technology of television, and primarily this was happening in America and Europe. It's important for you to understand that most of these technological inventions related to mass media was happening in these two areas primarily. So the 1930s saw the setting of the National Broadcasting Corporation, or the NBC, which is a television station in New York, and there was the British Broadcasting Corporation, popularly called the BBC, which was set up in London. The BBC in Britain began its first television service in 1936, and by 1939 television broadcasts began in the United States also. So clearly these two countries were ahead of the competition.
We clearly cannot in this short film show you examples of all the different types of program which we broadcast. They're astonishingly varied, but here's an impression of some of them, beginning with Picture Page in its original 1937 form.
BBC Television. This is the switchboard of Picture Page, a topical magazine introducing visitors, types, and personalities.
After the 20s and the 30s, the expansion of television was halted because of the Second World War. Second World War broke out in 1939 and lasted until 1945. So this halted the expansion of television. Though Nazi Germany used it widely as a propaganda tool, whether it be films, whether it be television, whether it be radio, books, pamphlets, Hitler's Nazi Germany utilized mass media to a large extent as a propaganda tool. In fact, the filmmaker Leni Riefenstahl used to make propaganda films for Hitler. By the late 1940s, after the war had ended, and early 1950, the focus was back on television, and the other developed countries also started adopting it as a medium of communication. So the 50s saw the further growth and development of television, which was halted in the 1940s. 1960s was an important decade because the era of satellite communication began with the launching of Early Bird in 1962, which was the first communication satellite. This was followed by Intelsat in 1965 and Intersputnik in 1971, and both these heralded a new era of communication. The satellites literally transformed the world into a global village. Global village is a concept given by the theorist Marshall McLuhan, which talks about the world, the entire globe being connected. So in the 1970s, now we're moving from the 60s to the 70s, we saw further development and sophistication of technology. Optical fiber cable and computer technology were invented. Though I would say the development of television across the world was lopsided, and it reached the Asian and African countries much later. So we've looked at the 1920s, right from the time the television was invented, to the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s and the 70s. We sort of traced a timeline and looked at what were the important developments, inventions which were taking place. We also looked at the precursor to television, which were the films, radio and newspaper. We looked at a global perspective. We looked at what was happening in America and what was happening in Europe as far as television is concerned.